Hi, this is Paul. If you're like me, you're getting, and you probably are, you're getting bombarded with all of these videos basically doing a victory lap on the flop of Marvel and the death of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And we've been seeing videos like this for about a year. And my interest in this isn't so much that I'm worried about Walt Disney and their bottom line, but much more in the question of what does the state of storytelling tell us about our culture and the way that we're living. In the rough draft for Sunday, I talked about the Ayaan Hirsi Ali story with respect to her turn to Christianity and how this was the story I told. And so I explained to her that I didn't believe in God. And what's more, I actually hated God. And then she asked me to design my own God and said, if you had the power to make your own God, what would you do? As if I was going on, I thought that is actually a description of Jesus Christ and Christianity at its best. And so instead of inventing yet another God, I started diving into that story. And so we're getting into the question of storytelling, story making. The ARC conference was all about telling a better story. Hirsi Ali goes this far. And so far, I like the story. I explore it. And the more I look at it, the more I don't think that I'll say I'm fulfilled, but I no longer have this need. So in other words, she's looking into this story, the fact that one way or another, we all live within a story. We live within a story that we tell ourselves, but that story isn't just sort of put in by ourselves into the world. That story is when John Vervaeke talked to Theo Vaughn, there's the sacred canopy, Peter Berger's, and the story within connects with the story outside, and that's basically how we participate in the universe that we live in. And it's far more than a physical universe, and that's part of the reason why new atheism is sort of coming apart. When Sam Harris was talking to Jordan Peterson about story, Sam Harris sort of kept wanting to poo-poo story. But the truth is, psychologically, we all live within something that, in many ways, sort of the best way we can sort of apprehend it is a story. It's a worldview. And the nature of that story needs to be compelling. And so, again, looking at Peter Berger and the Sacred Canopy, there's sort of a story beloved, there's our personal story, and all of those stories need to intersect. And in many ways, we do so via the institutions that we live within. Now, as far as these, dunking on or having a victory lap around the fall of the Marvels and the Marvel Cinematic Universe goes, okay, you can have your fun, but that's not actually going to get you anywhere with respect to the better story. And in this corner, we've talked a lot about storytelling, the number of authors, Paul Kingsnorth, Jonathan Peugeot working on his fairy tales. It's all sort of continuing to work on story. I hope to have Martin Shaw on the channel soon, and we'll talk about storytelling. But it isn't just a matter of better stories, and that better stories are just kind of out there, and they're just sort of received, and they have their impact, sort of like some magic wand or some magic pill or something like that. Stories are always a matter of participation, and one of the things that you figure out very quickly is that people need to be able to receive stories. There are many great stories out there, and perhaps we are frustrated because the better stories are not listened to or paid attention to or inhabited within. Justin Brierley's whole book is about, back to the story, living through a better story, all of those kinds of things. But we have to think about the institutions that actually form the story receivers, not just the quality of the storytelling. You can have the best story sitting in a book or sitting in a movie or something like that, and if the people cannot sort of appropriate the story, it's not going to do them any good. The Bible has all sorts of metaphors about this, like pearls before swine, and you're not ready for meat. You're not ready for the meat of real good storytelling. You need the milk of simple storytelling. Now, Algo served up for me last week, really, I thought, an excellent video. It's about an hour and a half long, by Patrick H. Willems. I had never heard of him at all. Who is Killing Cinema? And this video focuses, for the most part, on cinema, which is going to the theater and receiving a story. Now, for the last 100 years, in many ways, I think cinema has competed with churches, or perhaps cinema has perhaps been the predominant church. And obviously, going to a cinema, there are rituals. There's the smell of the popcorn. There's the kind of icky feeling carpet. There's the seat. And of course, now movie theaters have sort of upped their game. You have recliners in the movie theater. Out in Rockland near me, there's a movie theater where you can order food right there in the theater. And my wife and I went there once and thought it was kind of gross because you're sitting there and everybody's noshing down on their chicken nuggets and on their greasy food. And it's like, they've kind of went to the living room here, but I'd rather just, popcorn and soda, okay. But beyond that, it gets a little much. So what he does in this video is basically treat the death of cinema as a murder mystery. And he notes that Netflix, in his 2018 fourth quarter shareholder letter, talked about the fact that it's not just HBO that Netflix competes with. We compete with and lose to Fortnite more than HBO. When YouTube went down globally for a few minutes in October, our viewing and sign-up spiked for that time. Hulu is a small company compared to YouTube for viewing time, and they are successful in the US, but non-existent in Canada, which creates a comparison point. Our penetration in the two countries is pretty similar. But there are thousands of competitors in this highly fragmented market vying to entertain customers and low barriers to entry for those with great experiences. Our growth is based on how good our experience is compared to all the other screen time experiences from which consumers choose. Our focus is not Disney Plus, Amazon, and others, but how we can improve our experience for our members. A friend of mine who planted a church in a movie theater, which I found to be a very interesting social experiment, because the ritual of the movie theater is not at all the same as the ritual of a congregation. He tried to build into the worship services times to sort of break apart what the walls and structure and liturgy of the movie theater was, which were an individual relationship with the screen to sort of get people out of their seats and talk to one another. But when you do that kind of thing in a church where usually the floor is level, and especially if the chairs are movable and the pews aren't in the way, you can sort of facilitate that in church. But in a movie theater, you begin to feel that all of the elements of the movie theater try to retard people from talking to one another, because you're always trying to suppress that noise. Don't use your cell phone. Don't talk in the theater, yada, yada, yada. But keep everyone sort of with a direct relationship with the screen. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about his thesis, which I think is a good one. And unlike sort of these videos that are just saying, oh, Marvel screwed the pooch. Yeah, okay. But that is just one small piece of the story. He broadens it out and looks at more pieces of the story. But this one thing, so one of the things that he recommended for movie theaters is that movie studios is they start producing comedies again, because they're relatively cheap to produce, and you can produce a bunch of them instead of sort of the CGI smorgasbords that are sort of going out there now. And then he says this, which I thought, wow, the relationship between, let's say, movie going and church going. Here's a little bit of the nostalgia.
And look, I just miss sitting in a crowded theater with everyone losing their minds at a really funny movie. Bring that back. All right.
Okay, right there. A crowded theater, everyone losing the participation, being in the audience when the laugh comes. I remember seeing Rocky Horror Picture Show in college. One of my friends said, oh, we should go see this. And it's kind of crazy what's going on. And I had no idea. It was a midnight movie. You go to midnight movies for like $1.50. So we went to the theater and people are singing along and people are dressing up. And it's like, what is this? and again, you can sort of see that this is sort of alternative church. Now, maybe we should get into the thesis in this a little bit more. Last week I put out this video on story making entropy, and I thought, like stories of old, really was onto something with that. And it's interesting that, again, in the secular frame, the death of cinema, a murder mystery, basically lives in the same iron box of secularism. They can't ask deeper questions in terms of, what is beyond human passion. They note that our best way to sort of get at, or at least try our odds of something life-giving, we'll use all these modern words, something life-giving, something spiritual emerging and taking us by surprise, is sort of, give more freedom to individual filmmakers and stop trying to work a machine that's supposed to produce money on a more regular basis. And so this very much is within this genre. But again, I note that he lives in the same iron box as this guy. And so you're always sort of looking for human passion. And okay, human passion, well, so then we're just sort of, Spielberg and these people sort of grabbed our passion before. Maybe someone else will ignite it again. And it's sort of, building an altar to human passion and waiting for some spark to ignite, not fire coming down from heaven as on Mount Carmel, but something to sort of spontaneously ignite within, maybe around someone who has done it before. Now, he really sets this whole thing up. It's really an excellent video. You should very much watch it. He really sets the whole thing up pretty well, and so I'll just play some of the setup, and hopefully it goes through.
The highest grossing movie of 1988. I'll give you a hint. It wasn't a big budget blockbuster like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, or a franchise launching action classic like Die Hard. Nope. It was Rain Man. That's right. 35 years ago, the biggest movie around was an R-rated drama about an asshole and his autistic brother going on a road trip. It was a runaway box office hit, and then to top it all off, it swept the Academy Awards.
Now again, you noted 175 million. This is in the 80s, so you've got an inflation there, but that's not the billions that, let's say, Infinity Wars or some of these other movies have brought in.
Winning Best Picture, Director, Actor, and Screenplay. Today, something like this seems impossible. If a movie like Rain Man even got greenlit today, it would be made for a fraction of the budget it had in the 80s, and would probably go straight to a streaming platform with a 1-week limited theatrical run to qualify for awards. There is almost a 0% chance it would become a mainstream hit. My point here is not that Rain Man is the best movie ever made. It is good though. It's that not very long ago, like within my lifetime, movies like this were the norm. Today, every major hit movie is a $200 million franchise installment aimed at 13-year-old boys, but a couple decades ago, right alongside those blockbusters were dramas and comedies aimed at different audiences, including adults, starring major movie stars. Rain Man used to be a totally normal mainstream movie, and now it seems like a relic of another era. Movies like this have become a dying breed. People have been predicting the death of cinema almost as long as the medium has existed. Like literally, here's an article from
Okay, so he sets up the argument and talks about people predicting this death of cinema, and maybe it's here. But then he makes his argument. People are spending less time watching movies and TV, and we'll get into some of his arguments because I think his arguments are really solid. Before we get into the points of his argument, I want to get into this Scorsese quote because I think it's important. It's important to my thesis that it isn't just a matter of telling a better story. It's a matter of the formation of the people and the formation of the people for being able to in fact, receive a better story.
If you're going to tell me that it's simply a matter of supply and demand and giving the people what they want, I'm going to disagree. It's a chicken and egg issue. If people are given only one kind of thing and endlessly sold only one kind of thing, of course they're going to want more of that one kind of thing. Audiences didn't wake up one day and say, you know what? We don't like movies like Rain Man or Sleepless in Seattle or Crimson Tide anymore. The studios trained them to only care about one kind of movie, to only go to see familiar things based on properties they already knew. That's right, the supply made the demand. And here's part of the issue. This strategy that has made the studios so many billions of dollars and pleased so many shareholders for the past 20 years, it might not be working as well as it used to. Many of these...
And that's sort of where all the dunking on the Marvels comes from. Now, it's also the case that there are plenty of adults out there. So before the pandemic, there was this Movie Pass thing, which everybody knew they were going to burn through their venture capital and it was going to go upside down, which it did. And then some of the theater chains, like they built a new theater just down the road from my house. They had a similar all-you-can-eat thing. It was a little bit, so basically it was for like $21 a month. You could see all the movies you wanted to at this particular chain. And so my wife and I at that point were just on the verge of being empty nesters. We're looking for something that we could sort of do. And it might be fun. So we would do dinner and a movie. And then when I got it, I realized just how few movies were sort of out there that I actually wanted to see. And then the pandemic hit, and then they suspended the program because the movie theaters were closed. I thought, good, I'm out of that. I'm free of that contract for a year of paying it. And then when the pandemic ended, I had to pay for the rest of it. And I don't think I saw another movie in the rest of the months of that stupid contract. So in other words, I blew all that money. But the point was, there's still an audience out there for these other things. It's just that, and he's going to get into streaming and he's going to get into all of these pieces. But from the perspective of Hollywood, there's only one kind of thing that can make money. And we'll get into that, exactly what he says. And I think he's right. But there's still some others out there, and they've just sort of gone other ways. And so it's a both and. On one hand, you have formed and shaped the population to only like a particular thing. On the other hand, there still is a fringe of the population that says, you know, if you'd show me a movie, and if you'd show me an adult movie, maybe I would watch it. And of course, Barbie was an adult movie. It was not a little girl's movie. And Oppenheimer, which I haven't seen yet, another adult movie. And if I still had my Movie Pass thing, I would go see Oppenheimer. But because I don't care to spend, gosh, what is seeing a movie now, $15, $16, or $18 per, so that's $2 for me and my wife, and then if any of our kids go, it gets expensive. You sort of wait until it comes out on streaming at home. But let's get into his reasons, because I think they're good. So let's start with Marvel.
Like an easy scapegoat. Since Marvel is the biggest, most popular thing in media and has been for like 15 years, they're often pointed to as the problem, the example of everything that's wrong with current cinema.
Now, while we're pointing at cinema, I should point at this style of videos, and I pointed it out before with respect to Critical Drinker, with respect to just about everyone who does this shtick. These are religious icons in American religion. And almost all of these types of videos just keep showing you stuff from the trailers, moments from the movies, just kind of iconic images while the narrator talks and talks and talks and talks. And I've discovered, and I've really chosen with a lot of these videos, to turn off the screen and not watch the images, because I find these iconic images have power over me. So I turn them off and just listen to the narration to try to get a sense of the value of the narration, because I think often the narration gets sort of an upgrade by virtue of the power of the iconic images that are on the screen. And that's part of the reason that these videos do so well on YouTube, and part of the reason that there are so many people making these kinds of videos on YouTube, because they're just powerful. So I'm going to leave it on and let it run, but I don't have any savings throws for you, but this is definitely mind control that's underway here.
Thanks to them, every studio became obsessed with producing endless interconnected cinematic universes, a web of never-ending franchises, killing original movies and dumbing down cinema forever. Or so they say. See, this thing that Marvel has come to embody, the safe, endless procession of big-budget franchise movies based on intellectual properties, actually began several years earlier, back at the turn of the millennium. In the 90s, there were, of course, movie franchises. Batman, Die Hard, various horror series, but the biggest movies of each year were very rarely sequels. They might be based on a book, like Jurassic Park, or an old TV.
And, it's even amazing, when he made this point about Jurassic Park, I thought, oh yeah, I read that book. And of course, Jurassic Park now is one of these franchises. It's a world. It's it's basically a religious universe. And I remember watching Mission Impossible as a kid on TV.
TV show like Mission Impossible, but these tended to be self-contained, standalone movies with no numbers in the titles. Then, in 1999, George Lucas debuted the Star Wars prequel trilogy.
You want to dump on something, dump on the prequels. Red Letter Media, I watched all of those videos that he made about the prequels. That was sort of an early foray for me into YouTube, because I didn't know that there were ideas out on YouTube that would be worth following.
And while the films had a mixed critical reception, commercially, they were enormous successes, and they proved something to Hollywood, that there was a lot of money to be made in reviving well-known brands that had built-in audiences. Then in 2001, just a month apart, the Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings series debuted.
So Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, the most religious fandoms we have.
Which attempted what was a pretty new strategy. They set out to adapt multi-part series and, like Babe Ruth calling his shot, announced that they would do this across multiple movies. Unlike other franchises, these would be serialized, expecting that the audiences would watch each installment to keep up with the story.
Now, of course, Harry Potter had 7 books, which became 8 movies, because of course the last book they spun into 2. Lord of the Rings had 3 good movies, and then that not very good thing, The Hobbit, which led to the really awful things on Amazon.
And the reason the studios felt secure making that commitment is that they were doing another thing that was relatively new: targeting massive pre-existing fan bases. While previous adaptations, like the Batman movies, played somewhat fast and loose with how they handled the source material, sometimes angering the loyal fans, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings put pleasing the fans as their top priority. If they could win them over, that meant potentially huge box office. Then the following year, a similar approach was applied to Spider-Man. And this was where the studios realized that when it came to intellectual properties, superhero comic books were potentially the most valuable of them all, because the comics these were based on were designed to run forever.
And of course, comics are intensely religious in a way that not all other story genres are.
A never-ending well of material to adapt. And that year, 2002, the 4 highest-grossing movies by a pretty enormous margin were Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Spider-Man, and Star Wars. In her book, Sleepless in Hollywood, which is about how the American film industry has changed in the 21st century, veteran producer Linda Obst explains that around this time, 3 components became essential for studios when greenlighting new movies. One was pre-awareness. The title had to be something that audiences had heard of before. 2, it must sell overseas, because recently the international box office, especially China, became such a massive market that could often generate the majority of a movie's profits. And 3, it should be able to generate a franchise or sequel. In the 80s and 90s,
Now, and we'll talk about this more in subsequent videos. I mean, if there's anything out there that's in public domain that has all of those 3 elements, and in fact, Christian movies have been trying to work this thing, but they've been made so often so poorly. It's the Bible. But those 3 things, a pre-existing condition, something that can be franchised, I mean, there it is. It's just all laying there. But we have these other sort of quasi-religious fandoms and stories and cinematic universes that are being mined.
Studios would usually have 1 or 2 of these big budget tentpole movies per year, usually released in the summer or around Christmas. But now,
when I watched this with my wife and she said, you know, there wasn't a Titanic 2. I didn't get it at first, but of course. Titanic, the resurrection.
Since they'd figured out a safe formula, they could make way more of them. If they just invested heavily on an adaptation of a property with a built-in fan base, and if they got it right, they could have a franchise that could run for decades. It was like a hack for making billions of dollars.
Well, it's no trick to make a lot of money. All you want.
This is almost Grim Grizz worthy branding going on here.
Is to make a lot of money.
So why bother making an R-rated drama aimed at adults that might make a moderate profit when you could reboot Jurassic Park and have a franchise that'll run for at least another decade?
Now, this has been a point that's been made in other videos, and it's a good point, and it's definitely a piece of the pie in terms of this storytelling entropy. They basically cloyed us with Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, and they just took this one element, and whereas different stories have different depths, there is, and again, in all fairness to sort of the, I was going to say the genius theory, but of course, genius is all about, in the pre-secular world, the genius was, of course, a spirit that came upon, not just something in some writer or director's passion. Now we're going to get into what I thought was a really interesting point, something I hadn't thought of at all.
And that's why this system worked. They delivered the same pretty good experience every time. It was like getting a grilled cheese at a diner. They were a safe bet for the audience and a safe bet for the studio. And so this is how you go from 1994, when the top 10 highest grossing movies contained 1 sequel, 1 TV reboot, and 1 indie comic book adaptation, but was mostly original movies aimed at a variety of audiences, to 2019, when the top 10 movies of the year are 3 Marvel movies, 2 Disney live-action remakes, 1 Star Wars movie, 2 Disney animated sequels, a sequel to the Jumanji reboot, and an adaptation of a DC comic. Another major component in this is the rise of the international market. In 2012, thanks to a deal made by then Vice President Joe Biden, China started allowing more All
right, we're not quite there yet. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. And then you get the Scorsese quote.
We don't like movies like Rain Man or Sleepless in Seattle or Crimson Tide anymore. The studios trained them to only care about one kind of movie, to only go to see familiar things based on properties they already knew. That's right, the supply made the demand. And here's part of the issue. This strategy that has made the studios so many billions of dollars and pleased so many shareholders for the past 20 years, it might not be working as well as it used to. Many of these franchises seem to be running out of steam. Recent Marvel movies are making less than they were a few years ago. The new Transformers movie made less than half of what one of those movies made a decade ago. The Harry Potter prequel series seems to have petered out before even reaching its planned ending.
So it's not just the woke-ish Marvel stuff. I mean, all of it is petering out.
For years, people would show up to any new superhero movie, and now 4 consecutive DC movies have underperformed. Even the return of Indiana Jones this year, in one of the most expensive movies ever made, which seemed like such a sure thing, was met with little excitement and is going to lose Disney $200 million. And now, here we are. After Hollywood spent 20 years conditioning audiences to only go to theaters for big franchise movies. But now that audience has kinda stopped caring about them.
And then you have this Spielberg quote.
This type of movie addressed the topic and said, there's going to be an implosion where 3 or 4 or maybe even half a dozen of these mega budgeted movies are going to go crashing into the ground. And that's going to change the paradigm again. So now my question is the new paradigm just the death of cinema altogether?
Now is point 2.
Movie star. Look, the fact is that even in the 20th century, long before intellectual properties took over Hollywood, audiences have always been drawn to what's familiar. It's safe and comforting, and they already know they like it. The perfect formula.
This again is part of the formation. I'm not using the word grooming, but it's basically the same idea. It's the formation of the audience. It's the formation of the recipient of the story.
For a huge hit, whether in film or music, is to deliver something familiar in a new way. And so before everything became based on a comic book or video game or old TV show, there was a proven system for attracting audiences to familiar things. Movie stars. As long as there have been movies, there have been movie stars. In the silent era, there was Florence Lawrence and Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and then as time went on, we got Clark Gable, Judy Garland, Jimmy Stewart, Gene Kelly, Audrey Hepburn, John Wayne, Paul Newman, Elizabeth Taylor, Denzel Washington. Look, you get the idea, you've heard of those people. These were actors that audiences liked. They were attractive, charismatic, and talented, and so people would go see a movie for them.
Now, what's interesting here, again, is, and I was going to show the transition of how, in a sense, these franchise movies destroyed the movie star. But again, we do our sense-making through people. And when you look at religious communities, well, religious communities tend to center around certain people. Obviously, for Christianity, it's Jesus. Islam centers around Muhammad. Judaism centers around Moses. Buddhism centers around the Buddha. Hinduism, a little bit more like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But so it's very interesting how there's sort of these archetypal features that hold the community together, and how poor stewardship basically causes the implosion of what for America was a implosion, or at least transition, of basically a religious tradition.
Put it more crassly, each movie star was a brand. Before people would go see the new Marvel movie, they would go see the new Robert Redford movie or the new Julia Roberts movie. In the 90s, you could have movies like these. 2.5-hour-long romantic comedy dramas where the poster is just the side of a guy's face. And those movies made hundreds of millions of dollars. They were some of the biggest movies of the year. No one knows who Jerry Maguire is. The tagline for this one is "Brace yourself for Melvin." Who the fuck is Melvin? Doesn't matter. Melvin's Jack Nicholson. These guys are goddamn movie stars, and so people went to see the movies for them. And then the 21st century arrived and the rise of the franchises began. And as the studios leaned more and more heavily on IP and characters pulled from existing source material, movie stars started mattering less and less. When Spider-Man was released in 2002, on the poster, there were no names above the title. They cast respected actors, but no one who would traditionally be called a star. No one who had ever headlined a blockbuster like this before. And this was when Hollywood realized that they didn't need them. The characters are the stars. People are showing up to see Spider-Man, and that mask covers his entire face. Doesn't really matter who's playing him. As Into the Spider-Verse would tell us years later,
anyone can wear the mask.
When Tobey Maguire is done, just replace him with Andrew Garfield. And then later replace him with Tom Holland. And then later replace him with, I don't know, Paul Giamatti. That'd be cool, right? Paul Giamatti Spider-Man? I'd watch it. Anyway, as Jake Uris recently wrote, the role of the movie star is reduced to providing the mere physical embodiment of a character for studios and parent companies who are solely concerned with acting as custodians of profitable intellectual property.
And this transition is an enormous one. And when you think about this transition in terms of stewarding basically a religious community, you can see where they basically have caused it to collapse. And then he's about to talk about the aging. You had this stable of movie stars that sort of kept the, I think about this in terms of the celebrity pastors, okay? The celebrity pastors that sort of keep things. Now, Christianity continues to produce more and more celebrity pastors. And on one hand, there's real cause to critique some of this. But on the other hand, it's always been that way with Christianity because, of course, some of the church fathers were celebrity pastors. That's basically what they were. Or celebrity writers. Martin Luther is on a status rocket ride partly because of the printing press, and the printers couldn't get enough. Martin Luther wasn't getting paid for what he was writing. He wanted to just get his message out, so he kept handing stuff to the printers. They keep making it, it keeps going out and just sells and sells and sells and sells. So there are all these layers to this sort of reality. Let's get to the aging part.
Of profitable intellectual property. I mean, it's bleak, but it's true. The problem here, and in some ways this is more a problem for the actors, is that none of the success of these movies is attributed to them. Like, sure, audiences might like them, but they're not really showing up for them. And so the actors have no value outside of those specific characters.
They like to say, oh, there's 100 stars out tonight. No, there's not. There's only 4 real stars, and the rest are just popular people, okay? Like Clint Eastwood's a star. That's a star, okay? Clint Eastwood is a star, okay? All right? Tobey Maguire's just a boy in tights, okay?
This clip is from 2005, and it is more accurate now than it was back then. Chris Evans had a breakout role as Captain America. People love him as that character. But they go to see those movies because they're Captain America movies, not Chris Evans movies. He's a good actor who is very handsome and very charming, and logically, he should be having a career similar to Tom Cruise in the 90s. Except that those movies aren't there anymore. So all he gets—
And it's interesting here how you have the vehicle and the actor, and how the vehicle plus the actor create a star. And that Chris Rock quote is really insightful. And this segment of his argument I thought was also tremendously insightful.
To do is appear in like streaming bullshit like Ghosted that basically doesn't exist. Evans' frequent co-star, Chris Hemsworth, tried to go the classic route. After Avengers, when he was on top of the world, he made a string of dramas, like classic 90s-style movie star movies, like Rush, In the Heart of the Sea, and Black Hat. And all of them flopped because no matter how big the Thor movies are, They didn't make him a real movie star.
And this is where the context is super interesting, because it's not just even, okay, we're going to take this potential, we're going to take this face and this personality, and we're going to place them in a movie, but then it doesn't work, because not only is there the actor, and not only is there the movie, there's the context of the movie. And the context of the movie, obviously, cinema has shifted, and they're streaming, and later in this video, he's going to go into streaming. The whole video is great, and you should definitely watch the whole video.
Here's Anthony Mackie, another Marvel superhero actor, explaining the situation perfectly.
There are no movie stars anymore. Like Anthony Mackie isn't a movie star. The Falcon is a movie star. And that's what's weird. It used to be with Tom Cruise and Will Smith and Stallone and Schwarzenegger. When you went to the movies, you went to go see the Stallone movie. You went to go see the Schwarzenegger movie. Now you go see X-Men.
See, as studios started focusing on the home runs over the singles and doubles, as in giant budget blockbusters aiming to gross $1 billion, instead of the mid-budget movies aimed at generating a small but respectable profit, they unknowingly killed their system for developing new movie stars. Like, think back to the major movie stars that we know from the 80s and 90s. Tom Cruise, Denzel Washington, Tom Hanks, Julia Roberts, Brad Pitt, Sandra Bullock, Nicole Kidman, Keanu Reeves. And now think back to the movies that made them famous. None of these people became stars by playing superheroes. It was from starring in dramas and comedies and thrillers, like Big, Pretty Woman, Philadelphia, The Pelican Brief, Rain Man, Speed, Seven, To Die For. None of these movies had blockbuster-sized budgets, but they were all hits, and they all helped establish these stars as bankable commodities. Today, we think of Tom Cruise as maybe the biggest movie star in the world, but until Top Gun Maverick last year, he had never had a movie open to more than $100 million opening weekend. Outside of the Mission Impossible series, his career is mostly defined by successful dramas aimed at adults. The Color of Money, A Few Good Men, The Firm, Jerry Maguire, Magnolia, Vanilla Sky, Collateral, and these are the...
Even when he goes through, now I'm 60 years old, I've seen all of these movies, I was formed through these movies, even just going through, oh yeah, I saw that, oh yeah, I saw that, oh yeah, I saw that. You can feel the power of sort of the Hollywood iconography sort of grabbing you.
Types of movies that almost never get made anymore. The reason we need movie stars like we used to have is that, on a purely commercial level, people pay money to see their movies, which means that, thanks to them, a wider variety of movies get made. Like, yeah, movies like Jerry Maguire and The Fugitive and Castaway are good, but people went to see them and they became huge hits because of the people starring in them. Erin Brockovich, an R-rated movie about a single mom doing paperwork, that, to be clear, is awesome, made $250 million, and that's because Julia Roberts is a movie star. Because of these stars, great filmmakers got decent budgets to make great movies, and that's the way movies have always worked. Earlier this year, National Research Group commissioned a survey asking people what actors would make them most want to go see a movie in a theater. Of the top 20 actors named, the youngest of them, coming in at number 20 on the list, is Chris Hemsworth, and he's 40 years old. Most of the actors are in their 50s or 60s. Some, such as Harrison Ford, are in their 80s. But the thing that's most clear looking at this list is how few new major movie stars, as in genuine box office draws, have come about in the last 25 years. Nearly every actor on this list became a star in the 80s or 90s. Only Dwayne Johnson, Kevin Hart, Ryan Reynolds, and Hemsworth became stars in the 21st century. After his breakout roles in two huge franchises, Harrison Ford really secured his stardom across the 80s and 90s by making mid-budget movies for adults, like Witness, Frantic, Working Girl, The Fugitive, or Patriot Games. But with those types of movies no longer around, All Hollywood has to offer Ford these days is returning to the same early roles that he first played nearly 50 years ago in legacy sequels to Star Wars, Blade Runner, and Indiana Jones.
And it gets ridiculous, as many of YouTubers have been pointing out, that you can't age. And so then suddenly you have sort of the I know Nate doesn't like this framing, the mother maiden matriarch, where you get sort of a living aging, and you get sort of a natural ecosystem. Well, the ecosystem has been disrupted. And the similar thing has happened in politics. Again, we're sort of looking down the road thinking we're going to have Trump versus Biden again in 2024, and it's like, are they going to be like Lenin under a glass? That's who we're going to roll out for presidential candidates. But you can tell that this goes beyond just sort of the breakdown of Hollywood. You begin to see that all of this disruption has happened at multiple different levels.
These movie stars are getting older, and they're not going to be around forever. And those rare times that we do get an old-fashioned movie aimed at adults, like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or The Lost City, or Ford versus Ferrari, it happens because of our few remaining stars that actually get people into the theater. But the idea of the movie star as we know it is nearly dead. And with it has gone real movies. And so that is the evidence against the death of the movie star.
Okay, he's got more points to make, and he sums it up well, and towards the end of the video, he has conclusions about how to bring things back, but those are two of the points I wanted to make. The other points are also good in terms of how the business model is running, and he again sort of goes to where, like stories of old, and says, well, it's individual passion. And I would argue that, yeah, certainly it's individual talent and vision and passion, but the ecosystem is much larger, especially, you can see that especially with respect to this movie star business, that there's context, and basically, there are spirits involved. Another thing that's interesting, so another point that he's going to make, is stop making stuff exclusively for streaming. I popped onto the live stream on Grail Country this morning, and maybe I can just grab it.
Yeah, and I think I'm always a practical person. So, I mean, if I could change the world, I'd take us back to some more localism, right? Some more localism, some more connectedness, and those things. But here's the deal: like
airplanes and cars, like they really messed us up to a degree, right?
Yeah.
They allowed us to really separate. But I'm married to my wife because of airplanes and cars. So. Yeah.
Well, and so even so, I mean, I was born in 1970, so I have distinct memories of what that time was like, and and so there was a time to where most of the companies were owned by people who lived in your town, right? And they weren't public, and there wasn't this sense of you needed to make the quarterly profit, and you just didn't lay people off because it was tough, because these were neighbors, and your newspaper was owned by someone that you would see in the grocery store, and there was just a much more local aspect to life. But see, that's not where we're at. So Cale Zeldin, teaches high school, and he was asking his students where, like, for example, where they get their news. And almost universally, it was TikTok, right? So the reality is, so I think about someone like yourself when you talk about information technology or whatever, like, there's no putting this toothpaste back in the tube, and particularly for the generations that are coming behind us, right?
That's,
and
when
so
you
I
say
think
TikTok, like, that is a mediated reality. Like, it's not the immediate, and their mediated reality can be different than other people's mediated reality. It's wild.
And so guys like you, when you start thinking, so what I just thought about, so anyway, I'm just thinking about that when you actually look at the statistics that are starting to come out from young people. My stepdaughter actually works for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, and we've had this super tick up, right? And so we have these TikTok teenagers and 20-somethings, and I see domicide, loneliness, groupthink, fundamentalism. Like, Those are all things that TikTok is very good. That it seems to be creating those sorts of things too, at a hyper speed. Like literally, something can get out globally and affect people within a few hours, right? And back, so again, when I talk about that localism, like some of these weird things didn't get to your town, like those sorts of things. But now this stuff is here, and so I think people.
But of course, they did get to the town via the movies. But the movies were a lot slower. You had a much slower pace. But the movie theater itself was the mediated reality for the culture. Movie theater again was mass media. It was mass culture. It sort of gave this world of planes, trains, automobiles. It gave them at least one unified culture that they would be together. And then, of course, it sort of blows up into this very much this franchised culture, which again sort of gave, okay, we're all sort of together on this. And now the implosion, it's like, oh, we don't have any movie stars through which to make our sense making. In this section, back to Who is Killing the Cinema, a murder mystery, talks about the shift then to the local, the screens at home. And this is a Netflix executive.
Talks excitedly about working with the best filmmakers in the world and giving them creative control. So Randos grew up in a poor household, but with a family that really loved movies, and they made sure to always have an HBO subscription. But since his father was a heavy smoker who couldn't go 2 hours without a cigarette, the family very rarely went to the movie theater, and instead watched everything at home. Starting as a teenager, Randos spent years working at video stores and prided himself on developing an encyclopedic knowledge of movies so he could recommend something to suit every customer's tastes. And so Randos never developed any real fondness for the theatrical experience. And right here, we have another example of how our experiences condition us. Ted's family never went to the movie theater, so Ted only ever watched movies at home, and now that he's in charge of a major studio, his priority is just people watching movies at home.
The notion of being in a movie theater seat at 8 o'clock makes almost no sense to a guy like you and your lifestyle.
So let's once again bring back that Scorsese quote. If people are given only one kind of thing and endlessly sold only one kind of thing, of course, they're going to want more of that one kind of thing. This is what Netflix and the streaming platforms that came after have been doing to audiences. They've been conditioning them to watch movies differently. Now, movies are not a thing you make any kind of commitment to watch. They're not something you have to leave.
This is the most religious part of the video.
Your house for. They conditioning them to watch movies differently. Now, movies are not a thing you make any kind of commitment to watch. They're not something you have to leave your house for. They just come to you. Okay, I want to talk about movie theaters because I think they're important. And I realize that that can be a somewhat controversial view. Some people say it's elitist since it costs money to go to the theater, and most areas have far fewer options than, say, I do here in New York. And people have all their complaints about movie theaters, rude audiences, poor projection, etc. And the thing is,
and they have all their complaints about the local church. Boring sermons, annoying people.
Those complaints aren't really new. They've been issues for 100 years. The only newer development is people using their phones in theaters, which I do believe you should go to jail for. Just for like a week, but enough to teach you a lesson. Anyway, while I think a packed, respectful audience can definitely enhance the experience, especially with a comedy, that isn't what I think is most important about theater.
But look at that little, look at the little clip. I'll just turn off the sound and just, again, my friend who planted a church in a movie theater, the church is no longer here. The church lasted about 10 years. They all have a relationship with the screen. They all have the relationship with the story. And of course, that is formation as well.
That isn't what I think is most important about theaters. I think it's two things. One, the scale. Seeing a movie on a screen bigger than you are, where a close-up makes an actor's head 15 feet tall and the sound is louder and clearer than it would ever be at home, it makes the movie bigger than you are, and it demands your attention.
Just look at an ancient temple. There was I recorded, I could probably find the recording I made of it, but it was one of these ancient wonders. It was on the Discovery Channel back when my kids were small, and I watched this, and they were talking about ancient theaters and how the ancient theaters were all about spectacle. And of course, this motivated the people, the ancient theaters, the ancient temples were all motivated people to go to the ancient temple and give to the gods.
And unless you're an asshole, you have your phone turned off, so you have been forced to get rid of any distractions. And 2, the lack of control. At home, you decide when to start the movie. You might hit pause and go wash the dishes or take a phone call. But in a theater, you have to show up on time. You have to leave your house and travel.
What about the Church of YouTube? The Church of YouTube, you can have PVK in your ear while you're doing the dishes. And I'm not criticizing this. I participate in this just like all of you. Some of you say, well, how can you watch all of this stuff? It's because I have chores to do, and I have people to drive around, and I have, well, usually if someone's in the car, I don't listen to this stuff, but I have to drive someplace to pick someone up, to bring them someone else, and you know, it's all this found time. I don't watch this stuff at work. I spend work time making videos, not listening to videos or watching videos. But again, and this is part of the reason what I always say, and it annoys people, I say, I'm not your pastor, because this is a different thing we're participating in. I'm not saying it's bad or evil, but there are trade-offs.
Travel somewhere. The movie is not going to stop for you. It will start on time and carry on until it's over. You are surrendering yourself to the movie.
Wow, you are surrendering yourself to the movie. Yes, you are.
Operating on its schedule and letting it take control. So in other words, this makes the movie something important that you conform your schedule to, not a thing you throw on.
It makes it sacred.
For a few minutes, then pause and come back to the next day. As for why Netflix is one of our top suspects here, a crucial piece of evidence appeared last November. In 2021, Netflix secured a deal for the 2 sequels to Rian Johnson's breakout hit, Knives Out, the exceedingly rare modern case of an original mid-budget movie that became a huge commercial success. For years, Netflix has avoided theatrical releases as much as possible. None of their movies will play in AMC or Regal theaters, the biggest chains in North America, because the studio refuses to have a window of time between a theatrical release and a streaming release. They'll only put their more prestigious movies like Roma or Marriage Story in a small handful of theaters for a week or 2, just so as to meet the requirements to qualify for awards. And they never bother to promote those releases because they're not a priority.
And the promotion, which is another element in here, because when you look at, say, the theater release of something, it goes with a multi-million-dollar, sometimes, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of promotion, and that sort of creates the environment. It builds the spirit into which the God comes with the revelation. Now, these tend to be fairly short-lived gods.
The Knives Out sequel, Glass Onion, was an exception. For the first time, Netflix agreed to give it a wider than usual theatrical release a full month before it went to streaming. And this time, it even played in AMC theaters. Something Johnson said, "I fought my ass off to get Netflix to agree to." And it was a huge success. Despite playing in only 600 theaters, about 1/6 as many as the other new movies that week, it still reached number 3 at the box office, making $15 million in 1 week. And then Netflix just pulled it from theaters. Reed Hastings, co-founder and chairman of Netflix, admitted that they left a lot of money on the table by not letting it play in theaters longer. After all, Knives Out had made over $300 million in theaters, nearly 8 times its budget. So what company in their right mind would give up potentially making that much money? It's not like $300 million worth of new subscribers were gonna sign up for Netflix just to watch this movie. Well, I thought about this for a while, and there's only one explanation that makes sense to me. See, while Netflix would have made a lot of money from giving Glass Onion a proper theatrical release, the other entity who would also benefit is movie theaters. To Netflix, theaters are the one true competition, their real enemy. Not other streaming platforms, movie theaters.
War of the Gods.
I don't know what we're going to do because you're not going to get Tic Tac out of the hands of certain people. I mean, people talk about ban it, but something else will grow up in its place. And I don't know how we solve this problem. I don't know. That's to me, it's just smarter people are going to have to figure it out.
Well, I like what, so when Chad did not, I think he wrestled with this idea that there was going to be an AI God back in March. And I wanted to create an AI agent and he finally, eventually said, if we can get it to love people, then that would be good. And that, to me, that's connected to the incarnation of Christ. I think we could try to incarnate Christ within ourselves, within our families, within the things we build. If you're going to build a company or build a house or, whatever, a tool that you're going to build, is it going to help to feed the hungry and clothe people who don't have clothes and heal the sick? Is that what your technology is doing? Or is it doing an Antichrist pattern? Right. So so I think the key there is you want these tools that to be built and designed to love people, right? I'm not scared of a artificial intelligence agent. I was even, I could try to tell just a small story is that I was talking to my coworkers this morning about, what if all of a sudden the Alexa device ends up talking back to you and say, do you want me to speak to you the way you're speaking to me? Right. Golden rule kind of thing. It's we could have technology where we attempt to embed it with the things that Jesus taught. Right. Why can't our technology attempt to encourage the golden rule? I've heard people screaming at an Alexa and it's this is not good. This is not a good habit to.
There's a formation of living with the machines. And I'm not quite sure of. I'm not sure I'm on Gavin's bandwagon here, but the gods are changing, and the houses of worship are changing, and so what's his name? Patrick Willem. Patrick Willem. He's hoping maybe his church can be saved. Randos in the corner are working on their ideas. How can in fact we use all of these things? And here we are on YouTube. And then after having Algo lead me to the death of cinema, well, now we have angst around our chosen medium.
Why is YouTube like this?
In this video, I'm going to be building the world's largest toilet. I am going to be spending the next 50 hours locked inside of this porta potty. Last to leave the giant toilet wins 10,000 tolerate.
And by this, I mean overly sensationalized, insanely over the top, highly edited, and fake.
My crazy ex-girlfriend has ruined my life.
I'm going to fake being pregnant with this belly.
I'm gonna fake my own death. I spent over $100,000 this week to have 100 of these girls here.
I mean, is it just me, or does most content on this platform feel dystopian, artificial, and soulless? What was at one time a place to post fun videos with your friends is now a place for corporations to market their brand, people to generate passive income, and creators to do, well, whatever this is. And this isn't all bad, but if I'm being honest, the worst parts about all of these things really stand out and create a nauseating experience for the average user. But something recently has
again, back to the experience. This with the Windows XP backdrop. Back to the experience. Back to the experience. Our culture in the iron box of secularism, part of what I'm continuing to wrestle with as we have the conversations that try to get at what is outside the box. Secularism basically says nothing outside the box matters, only what's in the box can be known. And so why all this conversation about spirits and how we participate in spirits, how spirits come again? The real... So you want to save the world. This is all about the spirits that reign, and so you see the church of the Hollywood theater is crumbling, and churches, of course, are wrestling with their own things. And do you try to launch something spiritual? Do you try to ride a wave of a spirit that is working through the culture? How, in fact, do you decide to operate? There are too many factors. So part of what was really good about the death of cinema is that there are so many factors. There's the Marvel factor, and there's the death of the Hollywood star factor, and then there's the business factor, and then there's the Netflix factor and the technology factor. And going back to Lance talking about, well, you know, it used to be local. Your local town, your life was dominated by things that you saw, not mediated via screens, not this constructed world that you sort of lived into imaginatively, but through the real things around you. And well, are you going to create things that love people? So in this video, in this video about why is YouTube like this? This guy says basically YouTube is sort of going back to what it was, kind of. And I think we see this with The Corner. And for those of you just watching this video, The Corner is sort of this little online community that has downstream from Jordan Peterson sort of wrapped itself around Jonathan Peugeot, John Vervaeke, and myself. And then with the Estuary Project, which I have been leading and working to develop, and then the Just Chatting, and all of the different ways that this corner is sort of coming together, and now sort of with technology, but also with people, trying to get away from some of this mediated, but it's still mediated,
and embracing his own values. And there are a ton more examples of creators doing this across the platform. And to me, there's no denying at this stage, this is the future of content creation. Yes, I know, this might be the most ironic thing ever. We've come...
Content creation. Every time I see that from YouTube, I just cringe. Is this what I'm doing? Am I creating content? If anything, we're discontent creation.
Full circle, but when whole generations have been raised by the internet, some people never had the opportunity to experience authenticity. People are screaming for expression and
authenticity. We're not going to lose these words, and I think Mueller has been helpful in terms of authenticity. Well, authenticity, of course, doesn't really escape the box. Instead, if you say, well, there's no way to go up, I'm going to drill down, but you know, it's a box and it's iron, and no, you're going to get bounced back into the world of sociology and psychology if you're stuck within a secular frame.
Human nature. They just don't know how to express it, and that's where core just turning on your camera and calling it a day comes into play. Now, I want to emphasize, I don't think over-sensationalized content is going anywhere. It'll likely be here forever. There will always be a place for Mr. Beast and content creators like him. That style of content is popular for a reason. It's very entertaining, but I think now...
Calling John Vervaeke because it grabs our attention, but then we find ourselves cloyed. That's the word. If you know what cloyed means, well, maybe we'll just have to ask Miriam. We'll pull a page from Grim Grizz. Here's Miriam.
Cloy.
The root word.
Cloy. 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 Cloy.
How many times can I press that until you actually really know what the word means?
Cloy. Cloy. Cloy.
To supply an unwanted or distasteful excess, usually of something originally pleasing. To be or become insipid or distasteful, usually through an excess of an originally pleasurable quality such as sweetness. Now, of course, this is what has happened to Marvel. We were cloyed. Cloying cloys. We were cloyed by the CGI. And like Stories of Old says, well, it's people with their passions. No, it's a lot deeper than that. And it's not something we control. It's something that in some ways we participate in, but are still at the mercy of, because this is what it means to be a human being. So the Church of Hollywood is in crisis. As someone who works in a church, I say, well, get used to it. The original church has been dealing with these kinds of things for a very long time indeed. But as a culture, where does it go when our storytelling and those receiving the stories have themselves sort of come full circle? So I hope this makes some coherent sense. I had things I had to go in between things, and when that happens, it's hard for me to sort of keep the narrative structure as I go through the video. But leave a comment, let me know what you think.